The caged fury. The air inside the underground alien prison was thick with the scent of metal, sweat, and something else. Fear. Guards stood stiffly, their weapons raised, their bodies tense. Their eyes were locked on the energy cage in the center of the room. Inside it, something moved. Something dangerous. A low growl rumbled from the darkness within the cage. The guards stepped back. Even behind the force field, they were afraid. She was in there. A creature of legend. A monster of war. A girl who was more beast than being. Her glowing yellow eyes peered out from the shadows, filled with nothing but rage. Chains covered her arms and legs, thick metal restraints designed to hold even the strongest creatures in the galaxy. But still, she pulled against them, her sharp claws scratching against the floor, her breath heavy with hatred. "She will kill us all," one guard whispered. "She should have been executed long ago," another muttered. Then the doors hissed open. Everyone turned as a tall figure stepped in. His boots echoed against the floor. His movements were calm. His face was unreadable. He was human. Commander Ray Carter. He glanced around the room, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the fear in the guard's eyes. His focus was on the cage, on the creature inside. "This is her?" he asked. The alien warden, a large reptilian being, nodded. "Yes, she is the last of her kind. The last of the Akari." His voice was filled with disgust. "A wild animal. She has killed more of my soldiers than I can count." Ray took a step forward, studying her closely. She didn't look like an animal to him. She looked like a prisoner. A survivor. The girl snarled, her fangs flashing. She lunged forward, slamming against the energy field. The force sent a shockwave through the room, making the guards jump back in fear. But Ray, he didn't even flinch. Their eyes met, human and beast. For a second, everything went silent. The air felt heavy, charged. The girl's breathing slowed. Her glowing eyes narrowed. She had seen fear before. She had seen hatred. She had seen warriors tremble before her. But this human, he wasn't afraid. He was something else. Something she didn't understand. Ray spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to fight anymore." The girl stiffened, confusion flickering across her face. The warden laughed cruelly. "You think you can tame her, human? You are a fool. She is nothing but a weapon. A killer. We let her loose in the arena, and she butchers anything in her path. That is all she knows." Ray didn't look away from her. "Maybe that's all you've given her the chance to be." A sudden metallic clang echoed through the room. The girl had stopped growling. Her claws curled slightly. For the first time in years, she hesitated. The guards didn't notice. The warden didn't care. But Ray saw it, and he knew in that moment she wasn't just some wild creature. She was something more, and he was the only one who could prove it, the last survivor of a fallen empire. The prison was silent long after the human had left. The girl sat in the dim light, her glowing eyes fixed on the cold metal floor. The chains around her wrists and ankles felt heavier than before, as if the weight of something unseen had settled onto her shoulders. She didn't understand what had just happened. For as long as she could remember, every creature who had come near her had one of two reactions: fear or violence. The guards feared her. The warriors who fought her in the arena attacked without hesitation. No one had ever looked at her the way the human did. Not with hatred, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he saw something in her that she couldn't see herself. She hated it. She hated him. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. "You don't have to fight anymore." A cruel laugh snapped her from her thoughts. The warden stood just outside the cage, arms crossed, his reptilian face twisted in amusement. "Did you like that, beast? Did the human's words touch your blackened soul?" She didn't react. She had learned long ago that words meant nothing in this place. The warden sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "What a waste of time. You think he's different, that he sees you as more than an animal. His grin widened, showing sharp, yellowed teeth. Humans are weak. He will be dead soon enough. And you will die as you were born, in chains. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. The warden stepped closer, pressing a button on the cage control panel. A low hum filled the air as the energy field weakened, just enough for him to toss something inside. It landed at her feet with a dull thud. The helmet. The inside was still stained with blood. She recognized it immediately. It belonged to the last opponent she had faced in the arena. Another warrior. Another corpse left in her wake. The warden chuckled. You are good at what you do. Maybe if you behave, I will let you fight again soon. Wouldn't you like that? She didn't move, didn't answer. But her claws tightened into fists. The warden smirked and walked away, his boots echoing in the dark hallway. She sat there for a long time, staring at the blood-streaked helmet. And then, without thinking, she pushed it away. A name lost to time. Ray Carter wasn't a fool. He had seen the look in her eyes before. The look of someone who had never been given a choice. He had seen it in war. He had seen it in prisoners, in soldiers who had been used, discarded, turned into weapons until there was nothing left but obedience and survival. She was no different. That night, he went through the classified records of the Akari species. What little information remained about them was buried deep in government files. The Akari had once been a proud race. Warriors, leaders, guardians of an ancient empire. Their skills in combat were unmatched, their honor unwavering. But they had been wiped out. Not by war, by betrayal. A coalition of alien factions had united against them, declaring the Akari too dangerous to exist. Their homeworld was burned. Their people were slaughtered. And those few who survived, enslaved, used as weapons in the very wars they had once fought to prevent. Ray clenched his fists. The girl in the cage wasn't just some wild creature. She was the last of her kind, the last Akari. And she didn't even know it. Her name, her real name, was erased from history. The files referred to her only by a designation, Subject 47. Ray exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. His mind was made up. Tomorrow, he would return, and he would call her by a name, a real one. Because if no one else was going to remind her who she was, then he would. The first step toward freedom. When Ray entered the prison the next day, the guards barely looked at him. They were used to his presence now. They assumed he was just another diplomat, another human playing at politics. They didn't realize he was planning something far more dangerous. The girl was in the same spot as before, her arms resting on her knees, her chains still fastened tight. But something was different. The helmet was gone. She had thrown it as far from her as possible. Ray took a slow step forward, stopping just outside the cage. The energy barrier crackled softly between them. She lifted her gaze, those piercing yellow eyes watching him in silence. For the first time, he spoke her name. Not Subject 47, not Beast, not Monster. Veka. The moment the word left his lips, she froze. Her eyes widened. Her breathing hitched. A name. Her name. It wasn't just a sound. It was a challenge to everything she had been forced to believe. She had been told she was nothing. A weapon. A killer. But a name meant something. A name meant she was someone. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. For the first time in her life, Veka wasn't sure what to do. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a person. A single word had changed everything. And deep inside, in a place long buried beneath anger and pain, she wasn't sure she hated it. The impossible bond. The silence in the prison cell stretched on, thick and suffocating like a heavy fog. Veka had not moved since the human spoke her name. Her name. It had been so long since she had heard one. She had been called many things: beast, Monster, killer, weapon, but never a name. Never something that belonged to her. And yet this human, this strange, fearless fool, had given her one. Veka. The sound of it sent a shiver down her spine, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Recognition. She met his gaze through the shimmering blue energy field of the cage. He was waiting, not speaking, not forcing her to react. Just waiting, testing her. She bared her teeth. "That is not my name," she hissed, her voice rough from years of silence. Ray Carter smiled slightly. "It is now." She let out a low growl. It was meant to intimidate him, to make him back away, but he didn't even flinch. She hated that. She hated the way he looked at her, like she wasn't just a thing, like she was someone. She had spent her whole life in cages, on battlefields, in arenas where the crowd roared for blood, her blood, the blood of anyone forced to face her. She had been trained to kill. Obedience or death. That was the law she lived by. So why did this human stand before her, offering something different? Freedom. Understanding. Choice? She didn't trust it. She didn't trust him. And yet, she had never felt so awake. The first time she listened. Ray took a step forward. The energy field crackled softly between them. "I'm going to make you an offer," he said. "You can stay here, in this cage, in these chains, and keep playing their game." Veka's claws twitched. "Or," he paused, "you can come with me." Veka let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Come with you," she spat. "And do what? Follow your orders? Obey like a good little pet?" Ray tilted his head slightly. "I don't want a pet. I want a fighter. Someone who chooses their own battles." Veka frowned. "Think about it," Ray continued. "You've been fighting your whole life. But not for yourself. Not really. You fight for them." He nodded toward the warden's control room. "For the crowds. For the ones who put you in chains." He leaned closer. His voice softened, but his words hit harder. "Don't you want to fight for you?" The question slammed into her like a strike to the gut. She opened her mouth to snarl something back, but the words died in her throat. Because she didn't know the answer. For so long, she had fought because she had to. Because there was no other choice. But now, for the first time, there was a different path, a different future. The idea made her chest tighten with something strange. Something close to hope. The price of freedom. A sharp buzzing sound filled the room. Ray turned just in time to see the warden step into the chamber, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. Their weapons were trained on him. "You have overstayed your welcome, human," the warden sneered. "Step away from the beast." Ray exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. He had known from the beginning that trying to reason with these creatures was pointless. But he had never planned on leaving without her. "Funny," Ray said, tilting his head. "I don't take orders from lizards." The warden's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare." Ray moved fast. Before the guards could react, he lunged, grabbing the nearest one's rifle and slamming its owner into the ground. The second guard raised his weapon. Ray dodged, twisting the first guard's rifle toward the attacker and pulling the trigger. A single blast. The second guard collapsed. The warden let out a shriek of rage. "Kill him." The last 2 guards charged. Ray spun, fluid and precise, taking one down with a well-placed elbow to the throat. The last one fired. Ray barely dodged, the heat of the plasma shot searing past his shoulder. He needed to move faster. He needed her. "Veka," Ray shouted. She was already moving. The moment the chaos started, she had tested the chains. They were strong, but so was she. And unlike before, she now had a reason to break them, a reason to fight. With a feral snarl, she yanked against the chains, ignoring the pain as metal bit into her skin. The sound of straining steel filled the room. Then, with a final roar, the restraints snapped. The warden's eyes widened in horror. "No," Veka lunged forward. She ripped the last guard off his feet, knocking his weapon from his hands. Before he could react, she slammed him into the floor with a sickening crack. The warden scrambled backward, desperate, terrified. You can't," he stammered. Veka grinned. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting because she was ordered to. She was fighting because she chose to. Ray kicked a blaster across the floor toward her. She caught it, her claws wrapping around the grip like it belonged there, like she was born for this. Ray smirked. "So, ready to get out of here?" Veka cocked the blaster. "Let's burn this place to the ground." A dangerous escape. The alarm screamed through the facility, red lights flashing like warning signals in a storm. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and plasma burns. Footsteps thundered down the hallways, guards shouting orders, weapons clicking as they prepared to stop the impossible. The impossible being Veka, unchained. She stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, her sharp claws gripping the stolen blaster. Her golden eyes burned with something new, not just rage, not just survival, but freedom. Ray Carter stood beside her, his stance relaxed but ready, a stolen rifle slung over his shoulder. He glanced at her, smirking. "You look like you just figured out what living feels like." Veka didn't look at him. She was still staring at her hands, the weight of the weapon, the weight of choice. She had always fought because they told her to. Now she was fighting because she wanted to. The realization sent a thrill through her veins, something dangerously close to exhilaration. Then came the voice. "Seal the exits. Do not let them escape." The warden's command echoed through the intercom. Veka's claws twitched around the blaster. They were already too late. Ray sighed dramatically. "I was hoping for a peaceful stroll out of here, but I guess that's off the table." Veka turned to him, her gaze sharp. "You knew this was going to happen." Ray flashed a grin. "I had a hunch." She stared at him, processing the madness of this reckless, absurdly fearless human. Then she let out something close to a laugh. Maybe, just maybe, she liked this. Running on the edge of death. The first wave of guards stormed into the room, their weapons raised. Veka moved on instinct. She didn't wait for orders, didn't hesitate. Her body was built for war, lightning-fast reflexes, strength beyond human limits. She twisted, fired, and 2 guards dropped before they could react. Ray let out a whistle. Not bad. She didn't reply. She was already spinning toward the next one, her claws tearing through armor like paper, throwing him into the energy barrier. Sparks exploded, the guard collapsing unconscious. Ray dodged a shot, rolling forward, then slammed his rifle into another guard's jaw, knocking him cold. More were coming. They needed to move. Ray grabbed Veka's arm. "Come on. This way." She didn't shake him off. They bolted through the corridor, Ray navigating like he had memorized the place. In reality, he had only been here a handful of times, but Ray had a gift for figuring things out under pressure. And right now, the pressure was trying to kill them. More guards flooded the hallways, but Veka wasn't slowing down. Her movements were swift, precise, deadly. She wasn't just escaping. She was taking back her life. The price of betrayal. They reached a security checkpoint. Reinforced blast doors blocked the only exit. Beyond it, their stolen ship prepped for takeoff. Ray slammed his fist against the control panel. "Damn it. Open it," Veka growled. Ray turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Yeah. And how exactly do you suggest I do that?" "Politely ask." Veka narrowed her eyes. Then, without another word, she lifted her blaster and shot the console. The panel exploded in sparks. The doors remained shut. Ray sighed. Wow, incredible strategy. Veka bared her teeth. "I was not made to open doors." Ray rolled his eyes and pulled out a small device from his belt. "Lucky for you I was." He knelt beside the ruined panel, twisting wires, bypassing the system. Veka glanced back. More guards were coming. She took a deep breath. No more chains. No more cages. She would not die here. "Work faster," she said. "Why does everyone always say that?" Ray muttered, fingers working quickly. The sound of approaching enemies grew louder. Veka raised her blaster. She would hold the line. The fire of a warrior. The first guard charged. Veka didn't even let him take 2 steps. She darted forward, her claws splashing across his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. 2 more followed. 1 fired, but she was too fast, twisting out of the way. The second tried to grapple her. Big mistake. She grabbed him, spun, and threw him into the first shooter. Ray glanced over his shoulder. "You really enjoy this, don't you?" Veka grinned for the first time in years. The blaster clicked empty. Out of ammo. She tossed it aside. No matter. She was the weapon. The next soldier hesitated. Fear flickered in his eyes. Veka saw it. Smelled it. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The guard ran. Ray let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Veka turned to him, her golden eyes shining. Too late. Before Ray could respond, the console beeped. The doors hissed open. "Movie!" Ray shouted. They bolted through, sprinting across the docking bay. The ship was waiting. Ray had stolen it earlier, preparing for the escape. It was small, fast, built for outrunning trouble, which was exactly what they needed. They rushed up the ramp, blaster fire raining behind them. Ray slammed his hand on the controls, sealing the hatch. Veka spun toward the cockpit, eyes scanning the controls. Ray slid into the pilot's seat. Ever flown before? She folded her arms. No. Ray grinned, flipping switches. Then hold on tight. Engines roared. The ship jolted upward. Guards stormed into the hangar, firing wildly. The ship's shields flashed as blaster bolts slammed against it. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the ship shot out of the hangar, breaking through the atmosphere. Veka felt it, the weight of the prison falling away behind her. For the first time in her life, she was not in chains. Not in a cage. She was free. She turned to Ray. "Where are we going?" Ray smirked. "Wherever we want." The stars stretched before them, endless, infinite, and for the first time, Veka wanted to see them all. The silent warrior speaks. The ship hummed softly as it glided through the vast, endless void of space. Stars flickered outside like distant embers in a cold, dark sea. Inside the cockpit, the tension hung thick and unspoken. Veka sat in the co-pilot's seat, her arms crossed, golden eyes locked on the expanse outside. She had never seen the stars like this before, without a cage around her, without chains binding her, without someone telling her where she belonged. She was free, and yet she had never felt more lost. Ray Carter leaned back in the pilot's chair, boots propped against the control panel. He glanced at her, then back at the flashing indicators on the dashboard. The ship was running fine. For now, they had outrun the prison's security, but Ray wasn't naive. They were still being hunted. His fingers tapped absently against the armrest before he finally spoke. "You all right?" Silence. Veka didn't respond. She barely even moved. Ray sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, I get it. First time in open space as a free person. It's a lot to take in." Nothing. She just kept staring out the window, as if trying to find something in the void. Ray exhaled through his nose, thinking. He wasn't good with quiet types. He liked people who talked, who cracked jokes, who yelled when they were pissed instead of going silent and brooding like some kind of deadly statue. Then again, Veka wasn't exactly people. She had been raised in blood and chains. She probably didn't even know how to process what was happening. So instead of pressing, Ray did what he did best. He talked. A past buried in ash. "You know," Ray began, stretching his arms behind his head, "I used to be a soldier. Did my time in the war. fought in a bunch of battles, saw way too many people die for causes they barely understood. Veka didn't react, but Ray saw the way her fingers twitched, the way her claws slightly curled as if she recognized his words. He continued, keeping his voice casual. After the war, I got out. Thought I'd start fresh. Maybe do some good, work as a diplomat, keep people from killing each other. Turns out, I was terrible at that. One corner of his mouth twitched upward. I don't like people telling me what to do. At that, Veka finally looked at him, just for a second. Ray didn't acknowledge it. He just kept talking. So I left. Started picking up work where I could. Escort missions, supply runs, the occasional reckless rescue mission for an alien girl who apparently never speaks. Her eyes flickered again. Ray smirked. Oh, so you are listening. Veka turned away. You talk too much. Ray let out a low chuckle. That's the first thing you've said since we left, he pointed out. You sure you want to waste it on an insult? She frowned, clearly irritated. It's not wasted. Ray laughed. Fair enough. A silence stretched between them, but this time it wasn't as heavy. A question that changes everything. After a while, Veka finally spoke again. Her voice was low, careful. Why did you save me? Ray turned his head slightly, studying her. It wasn't an easy question. Why had he done it? He could have walked away. Could have let the galaxy go on thinking she was nothing more than a dangerous relic of a forgotten war. But when he had looked at her, standing in that cage, fighting to breathe, to exist, to be more than just a weapon, he saw something. Someone. I don't know, he admitted finally. I couldn't leave you there. Veka's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Ray leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. Maybe because I've seen what happens when people are treated like nothing, and I don't believe in nothing. For the first time, Veka didn't look away. A name that means something. Minutes passed. The ship drifted through space. Then, without warning, Veka spoke again. Why? That name. Ray frowned. What? She didn't look at him, but her voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. Why did you call me Veka? Ray hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because Subject 47 was a cage, a number. It wasn't yours. Veka exhaled slowly, as if testing the truth of his words. Ray smiled slightly. And also because I needed something better to yell when we're in a fight. She huffed. That's a stupid reason. Ray grinned. Yeah, but it worked, didn't it? Veka rolled her eyes, but Ray caught the faintest flicker of amusement in them. He leaned back again, satisfied. For the first time since they escaped, Veka didn't feel like a soldier waiting for her next order. She felt like a person. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't hate that. The shadows of the past. The moment of quiet was interrupted by the ship's warning system. An alert flashed on the dashboard. Ray's expression darkened. Veka leaned forward. What is it? Ray's jaw clenched. Trouble. He hit a switch, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a cluster of incoming ships. Not just any ships. Hunters. They found us, Ray muttered. Veka stared at the screen. She recognized those markings. They weren't just mercenaries. They were the ones who had taken her. The ones who had killed her people. Her claws flexed. Her breath came slower. Ray noticed. You know them. Veka's voice was deadly calm. Yes. Ray glanced at her. He had seen people look at enemies with hatred, anger, revenge. But whatever was burning behind Veka's golden eyes wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something that meant war. Ray exhaled sharply. Well, looks like you'll get a chance to test that name after all. Veka smirked. Good. The ship's engines roared to life. Outside, the enemy ships closed in. Inside, Veka prepared for battle. For the first time, she wasn't fighting for a master. She wasn't fighting for survival. She was fighting for herself. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The final battle. The new purpose. The ship's alarms blared, flashing red across the cockpit. Enemy vessels were closing in, their sleek, predatory forms cutting through the void of space like knives. Veka watched them with calm intensity. She knew these ships. They belonged to the faction that had enslaved her people, the ones who had made her a prisoner, a weapon, a thing. Now, they had come to take her back. She flexed her claws, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something colder, deadlier. They had taken everything from her. She would take everything from them. Ray's voice cut through the tension. They're locking onto us. Veka turned to him. Run or fight. Ray smirked, flipping switches. You really think I'd run? Veka's lips curled into something dangerously close to a grin. Good answer. The ship jolted as the first barrage of plasma fire ripped through the empty space. Ray jerked the controls, twisting them into a barrel roll as they barely dodged the blast. Veka braced herself against the seat. The hunt had begun. Hunted by ghosts. The comm system crackled to life. A deep, cold voice filled the cabin. Subject 47. Surrender, and your suffering will be minimal. Veka's breathing slowed. She knew that voice. Commander Karish, one of the men responsible for the slaughter of her people. Her hands clenched into fists. Ray glanced at her. Friend of yours. Veka's claws scraped against the metal seat. No. Ray sighed. Didn't think so. Another barrage of blaster fire cut through space, narrowly missing them. Ray twisted the controls, pushing the ship into an aggressive dive. Veka's eyes flickered between the enemy vessels. 3 ships. Fast, heavily armed. Trained hunters. A fair fight. Ray yanked the ship into a sharp turn, dodging another plasma blast. I could really use a co-pilot right about now. Veka's claws twitched. She had never flown a ship before. But she had fought wars. She knew how to survive. She knew how to kill. Without a word, she slid into the weapons station. Her fingers danced over the controls. Missile systems, plasma cannons, rear defense turrets. A familiar thrill coursed through her veins. She had spent her whole life being hunted. Now, she was the predator. The first strike. Ray pulled them into a spin, barely avoiding the next barrage. Any time now, Veka. Veka's claws hovered over the trigger. She didn't fire immediately. She watched. Calculated. She knew how to fight. Knew that the first strike had to count. Her golden eyes tracked the lead ship, Karish's. The other 2 were positioning to flank them. She let them. She waited. Ray gritted his teeth, not to rush you, but now. She slammed the trigger. The ship's plasma cannons roared to life. The first shot wasn't aimed at the lead ship. She fired at the one to the left, blasting through its stabilizers. The ship veered violently, spinning out of control before slamming into its ally. The 2 ships exploded in a bright, violent burst of fire. Ray blinked. Holy hell. Veka smirked. 1 left. The monster unleashed. Karish's ship dodged through the explosion, angling toward them like a predator sensing weakness. The comm system crackled again. You are still just an animal, Subject 47. Veka's blood ran cold. She had heard those words before. Every day in the cages. Every time they sent her into the arenas, stripped her of a name, of a choice, of her people. Just an animal. Her claws dug into the controls. Ray heard the change in her breathing. He glanced at her. Veka. She was silent. Because she knew what she had to do. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was ending this. A reckoning in fire. Veka slammed the ship's thrusters to full power. Ray cursed as the ship rocketed forward, heading straight for Karish's vessel. Okay, I take it back. Maybe running isn't a bad idea. Veka didn't listen. She locked onto the enemy ship, her claws hovering over the missile controls. Karish had nowhere to run. His ship swerved, trying to break away. But Veka had anticipated it. She had studied his movements, knew how he thought. He saw her as an animal. He thought she would act on rage. But this was precision. She fired. A direct hit. The explosion lit up the void, tearing Karish's ship apart in a cascade of fire. Ray let out a breath. Well, that's one way to handle it. Veka didn't respond. She just stared at the wreckage, at the place where Karish had been. It was over. For the first time, she had faced one of the monsters of her past, and she had won. She had chosen her own fate, and she had survived. The birth of a legend. The ship drifted through the wreckage. Silence filled the cockpit. Veka leaned back in her seat, staring at the fading fire outside. Ray studied her, then smirked. So, what now? She exhaled slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on her. For the first time in her life, she didn't have an answer. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She wasn't a slave, or a weapon, or a number. She was something new, something she had never been allowed to be. Veka. Not Subject 47. Not an animal. Just Veka. She turned to Ray, her golden eyes shining with something fierce and unbreakable. Now, she said, voice steady. A slow, almost dangerous smile crossed her face. Now we make the galaxy remember my name. Ray grinned. I like the sound of that. The ship's engines flared to life, propelling them forward, away from the past, into the unknown. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The legend begins. The stars stretched before them, endless and uncharted, a sea of infinite possibilities. For the first time in her life, Veka wasn't looking for a way out. She had spent years fighting in cages, surrounded by walls too high to climb, by chains too strong to break. She had lived under the crushing weight of obedience or death, believing that her path had been decided for her long before she was born. Now, the galaxy was open, and she had no master. Ray leaned back in the pilot's seat, hands resting behind his head as he watched her. So, he said casually, how does it feel? Veka turned her golden eyes toward him. How does what feel? He gestured lazily toward the viewport. This. Being free. Veka didn't answer immediately. She had never thought about freedom before. Not truly. For so long, all she had thought about was survival. Freedom had been a fantasy, a dream, a lie. But now she was here. And the truth was staggering. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with air that wasn't tainted by the stench of sweat and blood, with air that didn't belong to a prison. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for someone else to tell her what to do. She could go anywhere, do anything. She met Ray's gaze and gave a small, almost disbelieving smirk. Strange. Ray grinned. Yeah, it is. A name that echoes. Silence filled the cockpit, but it wasn't heavy like before. It wasn't the silence of a cage or of waiting for the next fight. It was a silence of possibility. Ray stretched his arms behind his head. So, what's next for you, O mighty last warrior of the Akari? Veka's smirk faded slightly. The title sent a familiar ache through her chest. The last of the Akari. She had known it for a long time, but the words still felt too large, too heavy. She had spent her life fighting for nothing. But if she was truly the last, maybe it was time to fight for something. Something bigger than survival. Something that would make the galaxy remember her people. She turned to Ray, her expression unreadable. The ones who put me in chains. The ones who slaughtered my kind. They're still out there. Ray's smirk faded. Veka's claws lightly traced the metal armrest. They erased my people. They won't erase me. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto her lips. I will remind them. Ray studied her for a long moment. Then he grinned. See, now that's a cause I can get behind. Veka tilted her head. Why? Ray leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Because I like pissing off powerful people. And because, he shrugged, You deserve a hell of a lot more than just survival." Veka didn't react immediately. She had spent years being treated like a weapon, a thing, a tool to be used and discarded. She had fought in the arenas for creatures who saw her as entertainment. No one had ever told her she deserved anything. And yet here was this human, stubborn, reckless, infuriatingly unafraid. And he believed in her more than she believed in herself. The thought was almost terrifying. Almost. She looked back out at the stars. Then, finally, she made a choice. The first step toward war. Veka leaned forward, her fingers gliding over the navigation controls. Ray raised an eyebrow. "You know how to use that?" She didn't answer. She had never flown a ship before, but she had studied enough to learn quickly. The interface flickered to life. Galactic charts spread across the screen. One by one, Veka marked locations of interest. Former Akari strongholds, slave trading routes, military bases controlled by the ones who had destroyed her people. Ray whistled low. "That's a bold list." Veka's golden eyes gleamed. "I am not hiding," she said simply. Ray chuckled. "No, I didn't think you would." He reached forward, tapping one of the planets on the list. "This one first." Veka nodded. "It's a slave colony." Ray's smirk vanished. His easygoing attitude shifted into something sharp. She could tell he had seen things too. Things that had left marks on him. Things that made this fight his fight too. Ray cracked his knuckles. "All right then." He turned back to the controls and punched in the coordinates. The engines rumbled beneath them, eager. They had a purpose now. A fight worth fighting. And this time, Veka was choosing it for herself. The legend begins. The ship surged forward, the stars stretching into streaks of light as they jumped into hyperspace. Veka watched the swirling blue vortex outside the window, her expression calm, but her mind racing. For years, she had only known one thing: survival. Now, she was becoming something new. Not a slave, not a weapon, not just the last of her kind, but a warrior with a cause. And she would make sure that the entire galaxy knew her name. As they sped toward their first mission, Ray glanced at her. "So, what's our official plan?" "Go in, break things, cause chaos." Veka smirked. "Something like that." Ray chuckled. "Yeah, we're gonna be a real problem for the wrong people." Veka leaned back in her seat, arms crossed. "Good." And with that, the legend of Veka began.